Well, I really want to welcome everybody to our grand rounds today, and I'm especially pleased and excited that we are having one of our new faculty members give our grand rounds today. I want to let you know that it was such a pleasure to meet Dr. Gulrajani when we were working on our collaboration with the state of Minnesota. And the support of the state has been outstanding. Dr. Gulrajani responded to our wish that we would be able to establish a forensic psychiatry program, and it has been supported by the state of Minnesota. And so I'm just delighted that you joined us. Now, in addition to this, my view and that of discussing with our faculty has been that issues in the area of forensic psychiatry was very concerning to us, and that there were not enough forensic psychiatrists here to work on a number of the issues that will frequently come up in the press. So we're just delighted that you joined us. In addition to that, and what Dr. Gulrajani is going to talk about today, are issues in immigration cases as well. I think we know that this is a major issue in the state of Minnesota, and your background in this area is just outstanding. I want to let you know that Dr. Gulrajani received his degree from the University College of Medical Sciences at the University of Delhi in Delhi, India, and he did other steps forward, such as also in one of the hospitals in New Delhi, where he did his postgraduate residency in psychiatry, neurology, and drug de-addiction. Now, he moved to the United States, where he went to the University of Missouri School of Medicine. That's down in Columbia, and that's where he did his postgraduate residency in psychiatry. From there, he moved to Yale University and did his chief residency there in psychosomatic medicine, a really important step forward, obviously. And then also at Yale University School of Medicine, he became a fellow in forensic psychiatry in the Division of Law and Psychiatry in the department there. In addition to his training in this area, he has also worked at Yale University as a lecturer in psychiatry, SUNY Downstate, New York, in Brooklyn, where he has been an assistant clinical professor in psychiatry. He has done a number of major talks and in such places as the International Congress on Law and Mental Health at NYU Law School. He has 9 refereed publications, and I've been very pleased with his most recent one in the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law, where he is taking a look at the influence of race, culture, and socioeconomic status in forensic psychiatry. And I think we know that as we're taking a look at our community as it relates to forensic psychiatry, that this is a really, really important step. Dr. Gulrajani has an outstanding background in the area of different cultures and their needs as it relates to psychiatric care. And today he's going to be talking with us about mental health professionals in immigration cases, and he's going to talk about expanding roles and new collaborations. I really want to welcome you to being on our faculty, and thank you so much for giving grand rounds today. Thank you very much.
Is this working? Hello? Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Thank you for such a glorious introduction, Dr. Schultz. I'll spend the next 1 hour trying to live up to it. So when most people think about forensic psychiatry, typically They think about dark, dingy jail cells and criminals who are being evaluated by one-to-one examiners over long periods of time. Today, I'm going to talk about another aspect of forensic psychiatry that actually lays on the crossroads with cultural psychiatry. And this is how mental health professionals can get involved with individuals who are seeking refuge in countries globally and specifically in the United States. Let me first give you an outline of the talk that I'm going to be presenting today. How many people here know the difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker? So I'm going to start with that. And then I'm going to provide a brief background about the global refugee crisis. I'm going to talk about how individuals go about gaining refugee status in the United States. What are the legal requirements and standards laid down by the government? How do mental health professionals get involved in these individual cases? How is it that mental health expertise can be involved in explaining the effects of trauma to the courts on the credibility of these individuals? How cultural factors can sometimes impact credibility of individuals who are seeking asylum. Malingering, which is of course a huge subject in psychiatry, also has a role to play in these cases. And then I'm going to elaborate on a model of medico-legal collaboration that is already in place in several other universities across the country. I will enumerate some resources that are available for individuals who are seeking asylum in the United States. And finally, I will end by talking about a new collaboration that we have entered in with the University of Minnesota's Law School, their Center for New Americans, which will enhance our practice in this area. But first, I'm curious how many people saw this piece of news last week. Exactly a week ago, the vice president of Sierra Leone was sacked because he was seeking refuge in the United States. So this is just to demonstrate that individuals from all walks of life and various stratas want to leave their countries for separate reasons. But when we look at the top 3 reasons why people want to flee their countries, number 1, of course, is war or political oppression. And so, history is rife with examples of civil wars in Western African countries. We all know about, most recently, we've heard about the activities of Boko Haram in Nigeria. People also flee their countries because of natural disaster. We've recently been witness to the Ebola epidemic also in Western Africa. Prior to that, that region has also suffered, Central and Western Africa also suffered from famine in the Sahara Desert that has not only taken many lives, but also displaced many individuals. Many individuals also face persecution or torture from the dominant political party or the dominant political group in their country of origin and are therefore forced to flee. So coming to the subject of refugee versus asylum seeker, refugees are essentially individuals who are outside of their country, their home country, but are unable or unwilling to return home because they fear serious harm in their country of origin. An asylum seeker, on the contrary, is someone who says that he or she is a refugee, but whose claim has not yet been definitively evaluated by a host country, like the United States. Now, supposing you were a citizen of Afghanistan or Syria, where there is a lot of political upheaval going on, you could just run away into one of the neighboring countries. So if you were in Afghanistan, you would probably run into Pakistan. Now, Pakistan, unlike United States and Germany and some of the other Western countries, doesn't afford the same protections on people who run away to their country. So when they come to that country, they're not given any special rights. They don't get a social security number. They don't get health care. They don't get a green card. And so in a way, they are refugees, but they don't have asylum status under those countries. And that is where the distinction lies. And as the talk progresses, this will become more clear. In the United States, if a person wants asylum status, they must meet the definition of a refugee. They must already be in the United States or must be seeking admission at a port of entry. So just to give you a background on the global refugee crisis, I have pulled figures from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And by the end of 2013, 51.2 million individuals were forcibly displaced worldwide as a result of persecution, violence, conflict, or human rights violations. Now, of these, about 16.7 million were refugees, and about 33 million were displaced within their own countries. Of the 16.7 million, approximately 1.2 million were asylum seekers in different countries. In 2013, more than half of all refugees worldwide came from just 3 countries. Would anybody like to guess what those 3 countries were? Any guesses? Syria, very good. That is in the top 3. The top of the list was actually Afghanistan, 2.5 million people. About 2.5 million people in Syria. And where do you think the people from Syria ran to? To Turkey and Jordan, right. And Somalia, and we know that in Minnesota we have a huge Somali refugee population as well. About 1.2 million individuals submitted applications for asylum or refugee status to the UNHCR in 2013. About 110 of these were to Germany, and for the first time in history, Germany actually overtook the United States. There were more asylum applicants in Germany than there were in the United States, which had typically been top of the list for many years. And about 85,000 applicants in the United States and about 70,000 in South Africa. Now, resettlement through UNHCR is also a parallel process. Basically, applicants have to submit their application to UNHCR, and then host countries will decide whether they want to resettle these individuals or not. Resettlement is not a right, and the host countries have no obligation to accept these individuals. Resettlement of an individual depends on the admission criteria laid down by the recipient country. And in the United States, these criteria were specified under the Refugee Act of 1980, which was actually an amendment of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. In 2013, the United States received the highest number of individuals for resettlement globally, which was approximately 66,000. And the president has sanctioned a quota of 70,000 individuals annually in recent years. I don't know if this figure is very clear, but if you look here, it's actually Pakistan, which had 1.6 million refugees in 2013. Iran was home to approximately 850,000. Lebanon, about 850,000, mostly Syrians. The United States had about 265,000 individuals who came here as refugees in 2013. So let's talk about refugee status in the United States. There are 2 ways to obtain refugee status in the United States. For individuals who are outside the United States, they undergo the process of refugee resettlement. And essentially, there are satellite outposts where immigration officers will interview these individuals. And if they are adjudicated as refugees, they will be admitted to the United States as permanent residents. Individuals who are within the United States apply for asylum status. And initially, this petition is submitted to the Department of Homeland Security. and is an affirmative petition. That means it is not contested. If this initial application is denied, then they appeal and they apply for what is called withholding of removal or deportation. There are other criteria also which the United States applies for deporting individuals. For example, if they have been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude in the United States, they cannot stay in the United States and have to be deported. This includes most violent crimes. Individuals can also apply for protection under the Convention Against Torture, and these last three categories are referred to as asylum and related forms of relief, and this will be the focus of my talk today. I do want to specify that my talk today is not about the outstanding mental health needs of refugees. It is not about how we go about catering to these outstanding mental health needs. The talk today is how mental health professionals can assist courts in determining which individuals meet criteria for gaining asylum into the United States.
Chinmoy,
Yes, sir.
because you talked about mental health just now, when they're reviewing these asylum cases, are there health conditions or mental health conditions that rule you out from asylum?
No. And we'll talk more about the process here. So let's see how individuals go about seeking asylum in the United States. So I've already talked about this. Individuals who are here, those who are here unlawfully, or those whose affirmative asylum petition has been denied, typically have to raise asylum as a defense against their removal in immigration courts. Now, these hearings are adversarial and the government always has a lawyer. These individuals, on the other hand, are frequently unrepresented because representation is not a right for people who are not citizens. And many can neither afford private attorneys nor find pro bono representation within the 1-year time limit that has been specified. So legal requirements: all individuals who first come to the United States have to file for asylum within 1 year of their arrival in the United States. That's the first hurdle right there. If you did not apply within the first year, you will not be considered for asylum except under extraordinary circumstances. Now, to be designated a refugee, they have to meet 3 criteria that were laid down by the Refugee Act of 1980. They have to prove that the form of harm that they have suffered or the perceived harm was serious enough to be considered persecution, that the persecution has already been inflicted, or that the individual has a well-founded fear that it will be inflicted if they are forced to return to their home country, and that the persecution occurred on account of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. These are the only categories that the US government has recognized. So a lot of claims have fallen because individuals are not able to show they're belonging to one of these 5 categories. Most notably, individuals who are fleeing from Latin American countries because of gang violence are not able to show that they are being prosecuted by the government of that country. And so therefore, they do not fall under this category. Persecution can take many forms. It need not be physical. It can include several forms of discrimination, economic deprivation, and even psychiatric harm. So for example, if you're gay and you're in a country which is sexually oppressed and does not afford rights to individuals who are gay, they might be forced to leave their country because of discrimination. My home country, India, is one of these countries which is slowly undergoing the transformation, but it's not quite there. What does well-founded fear mean? Well-founded fear does not only mean that you should be fearful of something, but there should also be an objective basis behind that fear. And typically, this determination is made by supporting evidence and collateral information, sometimes through news from the host countries where some of these atrocities are taking place. against individuals. The burden of proof lies on the individual who is seeking asylum. So they have to prove that they are facing these terrible acts and that they have a well-founded fear that they will be subject to torture if they return to their country of origin. The evidence is usually in a form of their narrative of past or feared persecution on the basis of their belonging to one of the groups. And some documentary evidence can support their narrative. Hearings are usually held in front of an immigration judge and are usually brief. They're less than 2 hours. And within that 2 hours, the asylum seeker must present a credible testimony and prove that their fear is well-founded. So typically they have to give a detailed account of their own experience and also provide supporting information in support of their claim. So if I'm claiming that I belong to a certain tribe in Kenya and this tribe is being persecuted by the government there, I have to show at least some news clippings or some other narratives or information that supports my claim. So how does the immigration judge measure credibility? In 2005, the Congress passed the Real ID Act. And basically, this act laid down the standards that an immigration judge must apply to assess credibility of this individual who is testifying in front of them. And so what the act says is that a trier of fact, which is the judge, may base credibility determination on the demeanor, candor, and responsiveness of the applicant, the inherent plausibility of the applicant's account, and the consistency between the written and oral statements and the internal consistency of each statement. Now consider this example. So there is a young Salvadorian woman who had suffered significant trauma on account of her membership in a non-violent political party. Several male members of her family had been assassinated before she fled to the United States. And in the United States, she filed for refugee status and testified in front of an immigration judge. And, And the immigration judge found her not to be credible, citing amongst other reasons the fact that her testimony was hesitant, emotional, and vague. You can only imagine how arbitrary that determination is. So basically what the Real ID Act has done is that the immigration judge has been assigned the function to perform an on-the-spot mental state examination and determine if the individual is credible. Now, obviously, immigration judges' knowledge of the effects of trauma on the lives of these individuals and their demeanor is very limited. And these kinds of decisions led to the recognition by the courts that they need to be educated about potential effects of trauma upon asylum seekers. And so over the past 2 decades, this has led to an increased involvement of mental health professionals in cases pertaining to asylum and withholding of removal from the United States. So typically, these cases begin as referrals from law school clinics or law firms which are functioning in this area. And mental health professionals then evaluate the applicant and review available collateral data to provide opinion regarding the following areas. So mental health experts cannot actually testify as to whether an individual is credible or not. At best, studies have found that if we try to predict who's lying and who's not, we get it right 1 in 3 times. But what we can do is we can explain the effects of trauma on the demeanor and functioning of these individuals. We can explain the effects of trauma on memory and recall. We can explain how cultural factors can affect credibility in some of these individuals. Of course, we can explain and rule out malingering or include malingering in our case formulations. We can give somewhat of a measure of the severity of past persecution based on the individual's history since and their present symptomatology and their level of functioning. And in certain cases, mental health experts are able to provide an explanation of an individual's inability to meet the 1-year deadline on account of change or extraordinary circumstances, and I'll touch upon that later in the talk. First, let's talk about how trauma can affect an individual's demeanor. Now, everyone here knows that, before I move on, I'm going to talk about, let's envision the typical scenario in which these hearings are going on, right? I've already told you that immigration judges take maybe an hour or hour and a half to determine whether an individual is credible or not. The asylum seeker has the burden to prove, to provide a credible account of their past traumatic histories. At the same time, they're facing aggressive cross-examination from the prosecution. Many of these individuals are in detention and they're transported directly from their jail cell to the immigration court. And a majority of them don't speak English or rely on an interpreter. Most of them are unfamiliar with the US legal procedure and have never testified in front of anybody in the past. Now, individuals with past trauma frequently display numbing, social detachment, and avoidance that can affect their demeanor at the time of testimony. Comorbid conditions like depression may affect how vigorously an individual testifies in front of an immigration judge. And many of these individuals perceive threat in their surroundings, and they don't trust the people they're working with. And this can hamper them from testifying freely about their past. A detailed mental health evaluation can identify and incorporate all of these factors into an individual case formulation that is prepared to assist the court. Other areas where we can assist the court are to explain how trauma can affect memory. And obviously those of, I should say the whole audience here knows how trauma can affect memory, especially in individuals who have developed PTSD. By their own measure, UNHCR assesses that between 39 to 100% of these individuals meet criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. But frequently their petitions have been rejected because applicants are not able to provide a cogent chronological account of their traumatic past. Petitions have also been rejected because upon repeated recall, there were inconsistencies in the applicant's narrative, making their credibility suspect. While most courts now acknowledge that past trauma can affect memory and recall, the extent to which memory can be affected is very poorly understood by the justice system. The DSM-5, of course, recognizes that in PTSD there will be frequently distressing involuntary memories that individuals are not able to forget and make frantic efforts to control. But at the same time, there are also memory gaps. Individuals have an inability to voluntarily recall important aspects of trauma. And how does the human mind cope with painful memories? They're characteristically fragmented. They are difficult to arrange chronologically and can be suppressed altogether. They can be repressed, or the individual can undergo dissociation for the traumatic event altogether. And studies in literature largely support these conclusions. And this, if any of you have reviewed this literature, this is a vast body. There are several theories. Some experts have promulgated that memories for traumatic events are processed in a different part of the brain. Some believe that the amygdala is hyperactive. I'm just going to present two studies which are most representative of memory gaps in PTSD or in individuals who suffer trauma, actually. The first one came from Columbia University in 2003, and trauma survivors were required to describe their trauma at day 7, day 20, and day 120. They found that individuals who did not develop PTSD had brief memory gaps in their ability to recall the events. But individuals who actually developed PTSD demonstrated, in addition to the brief memory gaps, longer, progressive, and unstable memory gaps. The main limitation of this study was the sample size. Before this, Satwik et al. In 1997 did a study on Gulf War veterans in the West Haven VA in Connecticut, and they found that in their study they interviewed Gulf War veterans 1 month and 2 years after their return from war. When re-questioned, 88% of combat veterans changed their answers to specific questions about exposure to trauma. And the greatest changes were seen in veterans diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And the more the PTSD symptoms, the more variability there was in their answers. Now, what was ironic was that everybody was convinced that their answers were 100% accurate most of the times. So instead of calling these as inaccurate answers, they were termed inconsistencies because nobody really knew what the accurate answer was. And so you can see what a vital role a mental health professional can play in trying to explain inconsistencies in recall of traumatic experience in some of these individuals who are seeking asylum. Now, avoidance in PTSD and lack of energy and initiative seen in depression can at times help explain why the individual was unable to meet the one-year deadline for filing the petition. Consider why these individuals are fleeing their countries. Most of them are running away for survival. Suddenly they are in a new country where they don't speak the language and they don't know the law. Not only that, but they're also suffering from, harrowing flashbacks. They are not able to sleep. They are not comfortable. They are in the midst of strangers, and in those circumstances, they're expected to file a petition for asylum within 1 year of reaching this country. The most recent example that comes to my mind is a lady who's in her 60s, who's migrated from Kenya, from the Kissi tribe, and who is not allowed to gain asylum in the United States because she didn't file within 1 year. Many times, treatment records have assisted in bolstering the veracity of individuals' claims towards asylum, and I'm going to give you an example here. This is a real case. This is Mukamasoni versus Ashcroft that was argued in 2003. So Mukamasoni was a Rwandan woman whose mother and other members of the family were killed by members of an opposing tribe. And she was captured by the Rwandan Patriotic Front and was raped and tortured during her imprisonment. She applied for asylum slightly over 1 year after her arrival to the United States. And the immigration judge denied her petition, stating that she had not established the truthfulness of what is stated in her asylum application. And how does one establish that truthfulness? It is a very difficult entity to establish. The Board of Immigration Appeals also denied her appeal, and they said that she had failed to meet her burden of proof in establishing past persecution or a well-founded fear of future persecution. And they also said that she testified that she was raped during her incarcerations, but she didn't provide any details about these incidents. It was the Court of Appeals of the First Circuit that reversed the board's denial of her petition, and in doing so, they relied heavily on the mental health evaluation and records of mental health care. And they cited those in their opinion, which I'm going to quote. They said that the overwhelming weight of the evidence from the 25 pages of Dr. Wolf's notes and Dr. Wolf's psychological evaluation corroborates Mukamasoni's claims. The records are literally replete with information which supports the substance of Mukamasoni's testimony. Her account of her experience in Rwanda to Dr. Wolf is also consistent with the accounts given in her affidavit, application, and oral testimony. Dr. Wolf noted the physical evidence that corroborated her story, including ulcers developed in prison, her independently sought HIV testing in light of her fear of having contracted AIDS from her rapes, trauma-induced post-traumatic disorder, such as nightmare, hopelessness, sleeplessness, and distress of others. Moving on next to how cultural factors can affect credibility. Again, I'm going to provide an outline here. Cultural psychiatry is a very wide topic, but as I've already mentioned, when these individuals first land in a host country, there is the problem of linguistic equivalence, even before the problem of language arises, because even if you do find interpreters, sometimes words that exist in their language do not exist in English, and some words that are present in English do not exist in their language. I see this in criminal trials all the time when individuals from a different culture don't know what a jury is because they don't have a jury system in their country, right? They don't know what the Fifth Amendment is because they don't have the right to remain silent in their country. And they definitely don't know what the Sixth Amendment is because they've never been offered legal counsel before. And even if you are able to find an interpreter, going back to the lady from the Kissi tribe in Kenya, how many individuals do you think are there in Minnesota who speak Kissi and are able to translate it effectively? So there are problems encountered with interpreters. And broadly, there are two types of problems. First, the interpreter does not translate verbatim what the individual is saying, or they will editorialize the comments, or they will give you their own interpretation, and thereby affect what the individual has actually said to you. And the other way is when you are actually looking for them to interpret some of the things that the individual is saying, but you're not able to make any headway because the interpreter themselves don't know what the significance is. And then, of course, there are cultural differences between the evaluator and the evaluee. Many evaluators are not able to understand the mechanism of collective avoidance that is displayed by many of these people. So let me give you an example. Yesterday, there was a piece of news which said that the Boko Haram has abducted women and children from a village, from a specific tribe in Nigeria. The Boko Haram has done this before. There are many militant groups in Africa who have engaged in these practices, and in one of these instances, they abducted several women from a particular tribe and detained them for several weeks. And during those weeks, they were repeatedly assaulted and raped, but then eventually returned back to their village. Now, when you talk to the people from that particular tribe, they feel such guilt and shame in talking about those events. They'll describe that period of time as the time when the women were away. Now, if you're not an experienced evaluator or not a culturally competent one, you will take their word for it, and you will completely miss the entire history of trauma. And so, I've already talked about guilt and shame that complicates testimonials of trauma. Not all cultures give the same emphasis to liberty as we do in the United States. In many cultures, talking about sexuality is a taboo. In many cultures, you fall from grace or you lose respect if you talk about traumas or insults that you have suffered in the past. And so a lot of these people are not able to open up with every examiner. Now, most recently, I was examining a woman from a totally different culture, and she had undergone repeated sexual trauma. And this was a difficult barrier for me. And the only way, or at least one of the ways that I found to get around this was to also insist on an interpreter who was a woman. And a lot of times, because she developed a very intimate bond with the woman interpreter, she was able to open up and give a discourse or a narrative of her past experiences. And so evaluators are also able to describe an individual's presentation in their unique cultural perspective. So we all know that in several countries, depression is not depression. It's a cloud behind the eyes, or it's subtle backache that hasn't gone away for many, many years. Or sometimes, a lack of masculinity is really the first expression of depression of many, many years. In some instances, experts are also able to educate the courts regarding some cultural practices and norms that I just delineated. So I'll give you an example of a case where an expert was able to educate the court about some cultural practices, even though the expert in this case was an anthropologist. But this is a famous landmark case for anybody who's worked in the area of immigration. This is called in the case of Fawzia Kisinga, and this came out of DC. This involved female genital cutting. Fawzia Kisinga was a member of the Chamba Kunsuntu tribe in northern Togo. And an immigration judge denied her petition, finding what she was saying was incredible and not plausible. So let me tell you her story. She was born in an affluent family. Her father was an influential person. Female genital cutting was a rampant practice in her tribe, but her father, while he was alive, was able to keep her protected. Unfortunately, he died when she was around 17 or 18, and then the other members of the community banished her mother and snatched this girl from the family with the intention of marrying her off to a man who was 45 years older than her after she underwent female genital cutting. Now, the immigration judge said, what I'm not able to understand is how, in a culture where female genital cutting is so common, a father could protect his daughter from undergoing the practice. And after the father's death, his family could take control of the daughter and banish the mother. Now, in this particular scenario, an expert anthropologist confirmed these cultural norms of the practice of female genital cutting and the practice of marrying off young women to much older men. And on appeal, the asylum seeker was found credible. I don't know how many people have read Khalid Hosseini in his new book, and I'm trying to remember the name, the gentleman who wrote The Kite Runner. His second book actually gives a very vivid description of some of these practices in Afghanistan. Not the female genital cutting, but the fact that young teenagers, girls are married off to much older men. I'm only going to touch about malingering. Malingering is a very obvious factor in determining credibility of some of these individuals. Why? Because achieving refugee status in the United States is a very strong external motivator, considering all the protections that these individuals receive once they have come in. Yes, that book is called 1,000 Splendid Suns. All right. And determination of credibility is best left to the judge. But as a mental health expert, you can rule out malingering and therefore bolster the claim of credibility in some cases. But also, the assessment is very difficult because there's very little collateral information available. And independent mental health evaluators are in the unique position to provide an objective assessment free of bias, let's say as compared to an assessment that would be provided by the individual who's been treating the asylum seeker for symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. However, once you suspect that an individual is malingering, then you would communicate your opinion to the attorney, and that's where your consultation will most likely end. So about 2 decades ago, psychiatrists started getting involved with law school clinics and pro bono law firms who were functioning in this area. And over the years, several fellowship programs in forensic psychiatry have incorporated training in immigration cases in their curricula. And prominent among these are Yale University, Georgetown, Oregon Health Sciences University, and several others. And Prabhu and Baranowski from Yale have delineated 3 roles that mental health professionals can play in these cases, which are defined as consultation and education, evaluation and case formulation, and communication of an integrated narrative. Now, in the course of my talk, I have touched upon most of these, but there are some that are left. You know, oftentimes, you're working with a law student who has been assigned an immigration case, or an attorney who's clueless about how to go about taking a traumatic history for several of the factors that I've already delineated. But more than that, they are not aware of what the emotional state of the individual they are interviewing is. And that is where a mental health professional can help. They can titrate the exposure or recollection of traumatic events in these individuals. They can recognize when an individual is shutting down. They can recognize the onset of a psychiatric emergency in individuals who are suicidal. And of course, they can nurture the individual so that their capacity to narrate is maximized in the interview. Many of these attorneys also undergo vicarious trauma themselves. Why? Because Often they have huge caseloads. Most of them are working pro bono. And unlike you and me, they don't have peer support groups. They don't meet weekly and talk about their experience. Most of them, have no real supports to deal with some of the unrecognized trauma that they themselves undergo. Finally, mental health experts can also prepare clients for testifying in court in front of an immigration judge. How to control your emotions, and sometimes mental health professionals in the community have also rallied community support in the form of churches or other social organizations that can help these individuals not completely break down in front of a judge. In recent times, and because of these expanding collaborations in recent times, a couple of new issues have come forward. In 2011, there was a landmark case of an individual who was from another country and was suffering from schizophrenia. And he was so symptomatic that he wasn't able to testify in front of the judge. He had frank symptoms of psychosis, and he clearly did not understand what was going on in his case. And so in this case, which was the matter of Mom in 2011, the Board of Immigration Appeal let down the criteria which determine an individual's competency to proceed in immigration cases. And they said that the legal standard is whether he or she has a rational and factual understanding of the nature and object of the proceedings, can consult with the attorney or representative if there is one, and has a reasonable opportunity to examine and present evidence and cross-examine witnesses, which any of you who have worked in criminal cases know is very similar to the legal standard that has been adopted in an individual's competency to proceed in criminal matters, which is, do they understand what they're being charged for, and are they able to work with a lawyer to prepare their own defense? And so in the past few years, experts who are working in this area have also received referrals to assess an individual's capacity to proceed. And the U visa petition is also an area where mental health experts are increasingly being asked to testify in. So the U visa is reserved for individuals where individuals are victims of certain crimes, where they have suffered mental or physical abuse and are helpful to law enforcement or government officials in investigation or prosecution. So I'm currently in the process of evaluating an individual who has suffered severe domestic violence at the hands of an American citizen who's also a gang member. Just to give you an example. What do asylum seekers in Minnesota do? Where do they go for legal advice? They can go to an organization called the Advocates for Human Rights. The American Refugee Committee is very active, and the Center for New Americans at the University of Minnesota School of Law. And I'm sure there are more. I've been in Minnesota only about 8 months, and these are the ones that I know of. Individuals who meet the definition of torture under the Convention Against Torture can seek treatment at the Center for Victims of Torture in St. Paul, which is a UN-funded organization. Finally, I have only 3 minutes left, so I'm going to talk about the new collaboration with the University of Minnesota Law School, the Center for New Americans. This is a center that was founded in 2013 with the support from the Rabina Foundation. And this is the university's law school's partnership with leading area law firms and nonprofit immigration legal services. They have 3 clinics, and they have the Federal Immigration Litigation Clinic, Immigration and Human Rights Clinic, and the Detainee Rights Clinic. And for the past few months, I have been involved in this clinic. I started working in the area of immigration while I was in training, and this has always been fascinating to me. And so, as some of you know, I have put in an application for a fellowship training program in forensic psychiatry, which Dr. Schultz talked about. Once the fellowship is up and running, the intention is to actually involve forensic psychiatry fellows in some of these cases. They will be attending some didactics at the university. They will be providing consultation to student attorneys. They will get engaged in client interviews, and they will get an experience of report writing and testifying in some of these cases. And in doing so, they will get the opportunity to work with a very culturally diverse population, learn how to collaborate with attorneys, which is a core competence for forensic psychiatry. They will provide much needed expertise in asylum cases, and we expect that that actives will begin in 2016. And to sum up, by way of today's presentation, I would like to draw the attention of the audience to the plight of some of these individuals who are seeking refuge in different countries. They have been displaced from their home country. They have no place to call home. They have run away, and suddenly they find themselves in a foreign country where they don't even speak the language, and there they face this uphill legal battle. Now, of course, being an immigrant myself, this issue is close to my heart. Right? And I often reflect back upon my own path of migration, which was so linear and easy and set. I didn't face even a minuscule amount of hardship, maybe the USMLE, but which is nothing compared to. During the course of my practice, I have heard harrowing tales of horrendous torture, physical and sexual abuse, emotional torture that some of these people have experienced, and some of the hardships that they have overcome to come here to the United States. And then they come to this country where they have no money, no job, no social support, no legal support, and many of them don't speak the language. In a sense, they are truly lost. So I'm going to end this talk with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, and which says, "The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others." Thank you.